Welcome into the Illini Inquirer podcast. It is Jeremy Werner, Mike LaTulip. Time to catch up with our Illini Inquirer basketball analyst for another week of Illinois basketball. The Illini bounced back with their win over Northwestern. The score was closer than it was on the court, 83-74. As Northwestern went on that big run, but Illinois up by 20 points for most of that game. Now Illinois goes on the road. They go to Nebraska and host Ohio State as well. So, Mike, how you doing, man? Good to see you.
Doing well. It's great to see you too, man. You said you're in the press box, right?
We had a couple of media availabilities today, so thanks for bearing with me. And I had to find my way up into the press box. I don't know if I'm actually allowed to be up here, but
I might have just blew up your spot. That's on me then.
That's why I got the blurred background right now. No, I'm up in the radio booth here, just trying to find a place where we can record this. But we make do. They haven't kicked me out yet, so
it's good. That's good. Yeah. When does spring football start?
I don't know if there's been a more hyped start to a spring football for Illinois, but yeah, late March, last week of March, after everyone comes back from spring break. So yeah, can be some fun position battles. I'm actually thinking about that, but 16 returning starters, not many position battles, mostly depth stuff, which is a good sign for the program. Where is Illinois in Mike LaTulip's preseason football rankings?
I'd probably have them anywhere between like 12 and 15, right? I mean, sure. I feel like that feels fair. Really, really awesome end of the season.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the years that I was there.
Tough.
Not great. Stuff. I mean, basketball was much better, and basketball was nowhere near where it's at right now either. So both these programs are in a hell of a position right now.
We talked about those years as Operation Prolonged Relevancy until basketball season started. We just wanted football to be relevant in mid-October, and that wasn't the case.
Now you got some real overlap.
Yeah. It's like, oh, basketball season's happening. We got football stuff happening. But basketball season is here, and what a bounce-back performance. Nice response against Northwestern. Really dominated the action from the start. Let up in the last 5 minutes. I think that's kind of natural, though gives Brad Underwood something to ream into his team about. But what stood out to you, Mike, about that response against Northwestern?
I think you knew they were going to come out and play with some fire after what happened against Maryland. There was no question. I think that was going to be the case. Brad was going to have them ready. They were going to be locked in, but it was great just to see the desperation that they played with, and diving on loose balls, covering for each other defensively. I think guys taking real ownership of their matchup as well. And then, like I said, guys covering for those guys that are taking ownership of those matchups. But I thought you had one of your cleanest halves of defense in that first half. And there's no surprise it was the half that featured toughness, that featured being first to the floor, that featured just, all out, just great communication, and it's amazing. When you check all those boxes, you're going to have a pretty darn good half.
So this is the first time we've talked to you since Brad officially said it, that Tomislav Ivisic is out with mono. What is the key to succeeding without Tomislav? Because I would imagine it's going to take some time, right? Just for him to get back to the court. Brad said he hasn't been around the team all that much here recently. They're putting him in like hyperbaric chambers to help expedite the process, doing everything they can right now to get him back to full strength. But we know that takes some time. So what is the key to this team, not just surviving, Mike, but succeeding against a part of the schedule they feel like is advantageous here?
Yeah, we've seen KJ out, and there was obviously a lot of talk about that, just how much of an integral piece he is to the team. But Tomaslav's right there with KJ, in my opinion. And I know Tomaslav's not a top 5 pick, but he's your second highest usage guy on the season, and he's a really key part to what you do on both ends. The way you can spread the floor offensively. You saw the way they wanted to play through Tomaslav when KJ was out, and then still doing some of that when KJ comes back. And what he does defensively. He's 7'1". I mean, we saw against Maryland that there is a lot of benefits to having a guy that is just simply 7'1". I think he's got really good instincts. I think he's got good hands. He doesn't have the quickest feet, but at the same time, he makes up for it in some of those other areas. So they're going to have to manage their schedule coming up. There aren't a ton of teams like Maryland, but I mean, it is a luxury to have a guy like Morez Johnson that you can just kind of insert, and he brings something different to the table compared to Tomas Slav, but still has a really, really big impact on the game. And look, we saw it happen against Maryland, like I said, and we didn't get a chance to talk about that. And so just real quick, and I think this is something to think about moving forward for however long Tomislav's out. But when you play against a team with two bigs, like Maryland was, and you're undermanned from a personnel standpoint in the front court, this is what I was thinking about during the game, because when you have Derek Queen, who's a non-shooter, let's call him a non-shooter, and they guarded him that way, and you have Julian Reese, who we've seen over the years can be really potent in the low post. What I didn't like about that game plan was you can't be undermanned in the post like that and then also guard somebody that is also a big and that gets in those high-low situations as a non-shooter. Because when you're undermanned like that, yes, you need to be good post defense and fight and have effort, but your second line of defense is ball pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't have ball pressure, you got Derek Queen sitting there at the top of the key and he can just aim and he can just throw over the top and you're fronting and Julian Reese roots you out. Now you're getting point blank layups. And if it's in the middle third of the floor, you don't have guys that are ready to come over and help and trap too. So I thought it was a great plan from Maryland. Actually on the broadcast, Willard after the first few minutes was like, stop taking jump shots.
Yeah.
What are we doing? And then literally the rest of the game, I feel like they didn't take a single jump shot. They did, but they really made it a point to go inside. So my point is, like, whether it's Devin Royal with Ohio State or Dawson Garcia or all these guys that can do stuff in the low post, you just need to not only hold your own down there, but the ball pressure on the perimeter has to be better than it was against Maryland.
I think what you're saying, Mike, is like they definitely have an advantage, right, in the post when you don't have Tomislav Ivisic and Morez Johnson didn't play his best that game. But you got to take advantage of the advantage that you can get by being smaller, get in their face. And Illinois didn't win the math problem because they didn't make threes in that game, right? Like, so yeah. Because Maryland's not a great shooting team and they're taking twos, you can make threes. They didn't take advantage of that. But yeah, I totally get that. Like, you have to somehow use it to your advantage as well, right?
Well, we talk about the speed. You mentioned the speed, right? If they got the advantage of size and you got the advantage of speed, then what the ball pressure does is create, airtime on passes. And if there's airtime on passes, that allows you to use your speed to rotate over, to get in position, to trap, to move around. Line drive passes and bullets into the post. There's no defense for that.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. And I know they showed zone too. I know people were probably excited about that, but you could see, and I think I was texting Trotter at the time, but they showed, this is why when you don't practice zone and you run zone, It's great as a rhythm disruptor and you can throw that in there, but the more you stay in it in something you haven't practiced, I texted Trotter after maybe the second zone possession. I said, got to get out. It's like it started to leak oil a little bit. So I like that they showed it, because I do think there's an element with the zone. I know we're going off on somewhat of a tangent here, but there's an element with zone that's like, it's a pride thing. You don't want to, I don't want to call it concede, but say man to man, chest to chest, mano a mano, like, you got us and we got to get out of zone. There's a lot of coaches that don't want to do that, because that's an admission of that.
Brad being one of them.
So the fact that he did it in that game and they got a turnover out of it right away, you could tell afterwards, like, because you're not as big with the smaller lineups, with this Dre Gibbs Allhorn out there, Kylan, KJ, there were so many gaps that were just wide open. I was like, they got to get out. So at least he's willing to show it.
Yeah, it was a desperation move for him, because he hates that. But obviously, Morez Johnson didn't play well against Maryland in his first career start. He was amped up about it, and tough matchup, but just got kind of bullied in that one. But what a bounce back against Northwestern, a far different matchup. But I just thought he set the tone in the first 10 minutes for a win. Basically, just Morez Johnson himself. But what impressed you most about what Morez did offensively, defensively, on the glass? What impressed you most, Mike?
Well, it's a hell of a challenge to guard the leading scorer in the Big Ten as a freshman. I don't care who you are. That's a really, really tall task. And he not only passed, he was tremendous with the way that he guarded Martinelli, because Morez is so uniquely equipped to hold up against a guy like that because of his size, because of his lateral quickness. And the trick with Martinelli is the angles. And it's the angles that he creates from pivoting. And that's where he trips a lot of guys up. I mean, you really have to level him off and discourage him from chewing up the space in between you and him. And you also have to show your hands. And that's where I thought Morez was really, really impressive. When these guys do the pivoting and get into your body and eat up leverage and space, a lot of times you get caught with your hands down. And then when they scoop into a shot, the transition of going from hands down to up is what creates a foul. Mm-hmm. So he was so early with getting his hands up, and that allowed him, because neither Barnhizer or Martinelli, when they're pivoting and shooting like that, both of them can dunk on a fast break, but they're not explosive athletes in the painted area. So if you get your hands up in time, now all you got to do is just time the block and show verticality. And I thought that's where he was really, really, really good. And he had a really good infrastructure around him too. We'll show it on the film. The guys around him, Ben Hamrikhaus, Jake Davis, obviously Kylan, KJ, all those guys understood the scout and understood who to play off of, when to offer help. And that just only helps a guy like Morez, because no man can do that against Martinelli and Barnhizer on an island for 20 minutes in the first half. That's just not sustainable. But he had help, and then he also did his job as well. I thought it was outstanding.
Mike, I think we've seen a history of this, Illinois being without guys for multiple games and being without stars for multiple games. Last year with Terrence Shannon, there was a silver lining that you found out with Marcus Damask. You have somebody you can run offense through, and that really paid off, in the long run for them. You think of Ayo DeSumo missing games, and that team really responded well, and Trent and Curbelo had really great performances during that stretch. What is the silver lining right now? I mean, you've been without Kaspers for multiple games. Now you're going to be without Tomislav for multiple weeks. What can be the silver lining of this for Illinois?
Well, we just talked about Morez, and when Tomislav comes back, I don't necessarily think that's going to mean backseat for Morez, because we saw them tinker with the two big lineup. And just by the numbers, they outscored teams by 55 points in the 42 minutes they played it. I know there's some non-conference in there. It's not all non-conference though. There's Big Ten games in there. There's Arkansas in there. There's a number of games in there where they played together. And so you look at, and you can't do that if Morez doesn't have the ability to hold up guarding wings, which I think he can. So now it kind of shifts your thought process of, okay, how do we manage with personnel? Because the thought of when you go two bigs is that Ben Hamrikhaus would have to be out, but I actually don't think that's the case. Mm-hmm. And it's because of how unique Morez is. Because if you look and if you have two bigs out there, obviously you can play Tomislav on one, you can play Ben on the other, and you can play Morez on a wing. If you have four guards out there, let's call it two wings and two guards, then you can put Morez on the more athletic wing and put Ben on the less athletic wing. And then you still on the offensive end, just even though you have Morez out there, you got two spacers in the front court, and then you got Kylan and KJ, or however you want to mix and match that backcourt. I mean, there's an avenue for them to do that, because by the numbers and by the metrics, when those guys are on the floor together, and there's a number of different pairings, like KJ and Tomislav, when they're on the floor together, it's just, mm-hmm. Per 100 possessions, they're outscoring teams by almost 30. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. So Morez is definitely taking a step forward. I think it's helpful for Ben to continue to get in a rhythm as well. They're continuing to go to some of those back downs. He shot 2 off the backboard in the game, but I still like that change up as a possession controller, because what you did with Marcus Damask last year when you shifted to that was you took away from some of your pace, obviously, but what you did is you limited turnovers, because guys kind of know where to be in that alignment. Marcus was really good at taking care of the ball, and you could just kind of rep it and hunt matchups. So that's going to be I think a key component moving forward. But the hope is that you get Tomas Slav back.
Right.
soon. Because I just flat out, you won't. This team isn't going to go where they want to go without him, and that's talking second weekend, advancing further than that. It's going to be with Ivisic out there.
Yeah, because I mean, Nebraska, Ohio State, Rutgers, Minnesota. Maybe you can survive and succeed without him, but then UCLA, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Duke, Michigan, Purdue, like to wrap up this regular season. And you need what I think is your second most valuable player in Tomislav Ivisic on the court. Kind of an interesting week for Ben Humrickhouse last week. Only 3 shots against Maryland. And I kept thinking, they need to get him some looks. They need to find a way to get him open. Then he hits 4 of 9 threes against Northwestern. And you're thinking, man, like when he hits threes, and Jake Davis did too, and we'll talk about him, but they need somebody who can consistently make them, and he can consistently make them. How do they kind of get him consistent looks? Because it feels like it's kind of a roller coaster, but when he's making shots, this team is really dangerous.
How do they get consistent looks for Ben Humrickhouse? Getting stops. That's how you get consistent looks for him, because it unlocks transition. And then not only transition, it allows in secondary transition for him to sprint down the floor and then sprint up into a slip, pick and pop. And we saw a possession in the Northwestern game where you get a stop and now they don't have their matchups correct. And you got a 6'9" guy that can shoot over a Ty Berry when he's closing out on him. So all that's important. I've talked about this for years, how much this game is tied together on both ends. And it's true for Ben Humrickhouse, where you can get him more space. It's by getting stops. There's no surprise in both games. You had a Northwestern game where you were getting stops. He got unlocked. Same thing against Oregon. And then Maryland couldn't get any stops. Everything is in the half court, and things just get congested. Not like this. The strength of this Illinois team is not in the half court. Yeah. It's playing with pace. It's getting out in transition, secondary transition. That's how you continue to unlock Ben Humrickhouse.
Jake Davis, last 9 games here, Mike. He's averaging 13 minutes, 5.2 points per game, but consistently on the court here recently. We've talked about why he's established that, but what is he giving this team? 11 points isn't going to happen all the time. He's only got a couple double-digit games, but what is he giving to this rotation right now?
Yeah, I mean, he's shooting 35% from 3 in conference play. So that's just another guy out there where when you look at the scout, you say, hey, we got to be a little bit aware of Jake Davis. Yeah. We can't let him get catch and shoot looks. And that creates more spacing, which is what you need when Tomislav's out. So he's been a really important piece and a silver lining in this as well. So I look at a guy that's a sophomore right now that plays like he's 23 years old. He really does. He's knows exactly what's expected of him, does that. I think he really competes defensively. I think people forget about his size. I mean, dude's legit 6'6".
Yeah. And
so when you have a non-factor 5 like Northwestern had, you can put Martinelli or put Morez on Martinelli and put Kylan Boswell on Barnheiser. And then, if it's Ben Humrickhouse, great. But if not, you can put Jake Davis on a 5 like that, because he plays hard. He boxes out. He gets into your body. I think he rebounds really well. And I will say, he gets some of the more egregious fouls called on him that I've seen. I mean, we talk about refs a lot. The foul that he got called on him in the first half for the offensive rebound that he was going for was just insane. So there's that. But again, knows his role. And I'll continue to say it. Coaches, when they look down the bench and they look to see who they can trust, the guy that comes in and just, exactly what you're going to get. There's peace. There's peace when you look down the bench and you see Jake Davis, because he's not going to go in. He may not go in and score 20, but he's not going to mess up the game.
Right.
And there's a ton of value in that.
Joey Wagner, I'll give him credit. Do you like the Jacob Grandison comp?
Yeah, I mean, they're different. Jake's probably a little bit more of a dynamic offensive player, but they're the same in the sense where they're both what you would call a connector.
Yeah.
And I think they also call it a connector too, where, hey, there's offense that you don't run offense for him, but there's offense that can flow through him because he knows when to slip. The 3 he got in the first half, he completely made Northwestern bust their switch where he's trailing the play. You got, I think KJ or Kylan on the left wing, or Trey. No, it's Trey White on the left wing. and he sprints down, and the angle he takes to sprint down, it looks like he's coming in from an angle to set a ball screen, and he just changes pace and sprints right to the left wing. They bust a switch throwback three, and he's great at setting flares, coming off of flares, when to back cut, when, like that. Those guys are important, and you can look at that and say, well, you can sub in anybody and do that. It's not true. Not because like guys have to. I talked about like the disease of more with the whole Pat Riley thing. Jake Davis comes in, and like I don't ever get the sense from Jake Davis where it's like, man, Jake feels like he needs to get his rocks off right now.
Yeah.
I don't ever feel that. And there's some other guys where I kind of feel that. And so there's a lot of value in that, like I said.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, road game at Nebraska on Thursday night. Never an easy place to play, but this is a Nebraska team that is struggling, especially offensively right now, Mike. So what are the keys, do you think, against this Cornhuskers team at Pinnacle Bank Arena, man? They show up. So it's never easy to win on the road, and that has been one of the tougher places to play on the road, though they have lost 4 straight at home.
Pinnacle Bank Arena, I'll start there. It truly is one of my favorite arenas in the Big Ten.
Why? Just
crazy underrated. It's even when they weren't good, and I know they're struggling right now, but they're better than they were when I was there. They still sold that place out because it's Nebraska athletics. Mm-hmm. And so there's that. It's a great atmosphere. When they redid the arena, my freshman year, we played in a completely different arena. Pinnacle Bank wasn't built yet. Sophomore year, you go in there, students are right behind you. They're into it. It's just from a aesthetic standpoint. I mean, it is like a beautiful arena. Mm-hmm. Really, really. I mean, you've been there, right?
Yeah. And if people have never been in that area, Lincoln is superb.
Awesome.
Like, it's just an awesome downtown area. The bars and restaurants around there. It is one of the best places to visit in the Big Ten. It just takes a while to get there. But you're right. I mean, because it takes a while to get there, like those fans, Nebraska athletics, whether it's volleyball, baseball, basketball, football, like means everything.
Yeah, it does. And so, look, you have a team that, be ready for a tough environment, be ready for desperation, because this is a Nebraska team that needs it. I mean, we're getting to the point now in the season where I think teams like Nebraska, like Minnesota, Washington, Iowa, who's been, slipping a little bit lately, you're looking at that top 15 in the Big Ten. Like you're looking at that 15th threshold because you don't want to be the teams that miss the Big Ten tournament. That's a horrible way to end your season. You want to at least say, we want that chance. We want that chance in March. It's very unlikely that we run the table, but we want that chance. And you don't get it if you finish outside of the top 15. So that's what you got to be ready for. But as far as keys go to the game, I don't know how happy people are going to be to hear this based off of the shooting percentages, but bombs away. Get ready. Threes are going up because out of all the high major teams in America, there's no team that gives up more threes by volume, percentage volume, right, than Nebraska. Because
49% of shots opponents take against Nebraska are threes.
And if you know Illinois like we do and the listeners do, by all means, you don't need to twist our arm.
Well, and the opponents make 42% of them. Right? Like
that's the issue, because that wasn't the case over the years. I mean, in conference play, I think opponents are making 38% maybe like the last time I checked. But yeah, I mean they're making it a high level. But the reason why they allow threes is because I've talked about their low holds, meaning they have a guy that just sits in the middle of the paint underneath the basket and is ready to rotate out either way when there's a skip pass, when there's a throwback. And on top of that, they plant guys there to discourage points in the paint. And then because they have all their guys around the basket and they're forcing these skips, they actually do really well in the defensive glass, relatively speaking, right? For a team that gives up that many threes, you would think that they wouldn't be as good on the glass, but they actually are. So you need to really make a concerted effort to get some back on the offensive glass. But I mean, I would expect this Illinois team to shoot somewhere between 30 and 40 threes in that game, truly. And we've just seen if they make 11 of them, that bodes pretty well. And 11 of them is what, like under 30% if you shoot 40. So they're going to get them up. Just I want everybody to be prepared for that. They're going to get him up.
That's not a bad thing against this team. Anything offensively? I mean, Bryce Williams is having a good year. Connor Sejan comes in there. Raleigh Worcester, another transfer. They really miss our boy, Rink Mast, right now. But what do you think of them offensively?
Yeah, I think they're better than their numbers indicate offensively. I think they have talented pieces. I mean, Bryce Williams has taken such a jump this year. Shout out to Isaac Trotter. He was all over that preseason, and he's really dynamic, and he's got size, and I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if there's some cases where Morez guards him. That just would not surprise me. And then maybe he gets switched on to him. Maybe it's an actual matchup. I don't know, but he's going to have some possessions on him. And so you can't let him get off from three. He can get it scored all three levels. We saw against Iowa this year where he just completely took over the game, hit the three to send it into overtime. Like he has takeover ability, if you want to call it that. But Connor Sejan's another guy we've seen where you just can't really forget about him because he's combustible as well. And Juwan Gary is a guy that just has dominated games on the glass and with his toughness. I mean, it's just they're the perfect team to fall asleep on. Mm-hmm. And they're the perfect team that can make you pay for falling asleep on them because they do have toughness. They do have outside shooting. They compete on the glass. They're not great on the glass, but they compete on the glass. So this is a tough test. And I always made the reference when Iowa was here, when Trent was here, is like, I don't care what you do on, a Saturday night in Mackey. I know you're going to get up for that game. I care what you do I always call it a Tuesday night in Lincoln, which kind of became unfair over the years because they got better. But in this case, I care deeply about what you do on a Thursday night in Lincoln because that tells me all I need to know about where your head's at with how you're building towards March, how serious you take an opponent that can absolutely beat you. This is a really tough test for this Illinois team. And you got to come out and be assertive and be the first to the floor like you were against Northwestern.
And then Sunday, Ohio State comes to town coming off wins against Purdue at Mackey, which is a hell of a win. Iowa at home, they really just crushed them. Iowa's not playing good basketball right now. And then they got Penn State on the road before coming to Illinois. Not the prettiest basketball I've seen from Ohio State. That Ohio State-Indiana game was one of the ugliest games I've seen this year. But they got talent, right? They have some talent on that team. So they turn it over. They don't shoot threes great, but that's another game, Mike. Like, you can't overlook this Ohio State team because they're going to be hungry. They're sitting there on the bubble right now.
They are sitting on the bubble, and the three losses that they had before that Purdue game were by a total of 5 points. Mm-hmm. So they're again not a team that you can sleep on because
it's a quad one home game right now.
Yeah, as far as offensive talent goes, they're probably top 5 in the conference. Their shooting ability, I mean, Bruce Thornton, Micah Parrish, Mobley, those are all guys that can hit 5+ threes in a game if you're not careful. So that's always something you got to look for with Ohio State. And, I think on top of that as well, I mean, Devin Royal's been a really tough matchup for a lot of guys. I think Morez is a guy, once again, that could draw that assignment. But you just have to limit their clean 3-point attempts. Because when Mobley, when Micah Parrish and those guys get going, it's tough to stop them because Mobley shoots it with range. Parrish is 6'6" and can shoot it over the top of you. I mean, this is just not a team where you want to play with fire. But yeah, I mean, you talked about it. I think in the Big Ten, what they've won 2 home games, right? Am I looking at that correctly? Just Iowa and Rutgers. Mm-hmm. I think are their 2 home games. Like that is a luckily, I mean, I shouldn't say luckily, but the Shot has been a place where I've said it for years. They need a smaller arena.
Well, Illinois is hosting them on Sunday.
Right.
Yeah, that place is dead.
That place is, but like they haven't been bad on the road. If you go in and win,
it might be better for Ohio State to go on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like if you go in and win at Mackey, you have my attention. Yeah, I don't care who you are. You have my attention. So cannot be a game. And like, let's face it, Illinois hasn't been great at home this year. Mm-hmm. They haven't. So you got to turn that around and protect home court. Because as far as like competing for Big Ten titles and stuff, you don't want this to become a trend at the State Farm Center, because it becomes, if you play 20 conference games and you start going 6-4, 7-3 at home every year, it's just going to be really hard to win titles consistently. When you got a Mackey Arena, when you got a Breslin Center, when these teams that just don't really drop games at home, outside of the one that Ohio State was able to go in and get against Purdue.
And Mike, I know you hate it. It's a noon tip-off on CBS.
I don't hate the noon tip-off. I hate the narrative around the noon tip-off.
Just saying.
It's just, I don't know. You play and you're at home. Like there's, I don't know. I don't want to spend too much time on the noon tip-off. You know how I feel about it.
Just riling you up. Last thing I wanted to ask you, because I talked to this Piper, because Chris Collins talked about the rivalry after the game in Northwestern. Like I thought he was spot on. Like, we got to win more to make this an actual rivalry game. But he feels like they're respected now, and I totally agree with that. Northwestern has earned that respect, winning a couple games against Illinois at home. But obviously, it's not the top rivalry for Illinois. So I want to ask you as a guy who played here for 4 years, what were the biggest rivalries when you played for Illinois basketball?
I mean, obviously Mizzou.
That's what we had as number one. Yeah.
Yeah. If we're going outside the conference, it was probably Mizzou, which honestly is kind of a shame, because I wish I could say, because the other team that was outside of the conference that we developed somewhat of a rivalry with, just because there were games where, not shockingly, if you followed Dylan Brooks' NBA career, Oregon was one of them, because his coming out party was against us at the United Center.
Remember that well.
He let us all know about it. And so when we played them in previous years and subsequent years, it's, there was always something there with Oregon, which is crazy, because that's faded. Obviously, there's I didn't feel that when Illinois went to Eugene, but
and I think Dustin Ford recruited him.
Yeah, he did.
Tried to start that Canadian pipeline. Finally led to Will Riley.
I'm a big Dylan Brooks fan, actually. But when we were there, and I'm trying to think, I mean, there were games where, and this is true for any rivalry in my opinion, and this is why I think the Iowa rivalry became what it was in kind of the late 2010s to early 2020s, was you have to have some sort of altercation. I firmly believe that. It was the handshake line at Iowa. It was McCaffrey and DeMonte, and that just sparks it. And now I almost feel like I'm ready. I don't want to look ahead. I'm looking forward to February 15th.
Yeah.
Because the social media with Michigan State and their fans and Illinois fans, but we had one game when I was at Illinois my sophomore year, and DJ Newbill and Kendrick Nunn got into a scrap, and Kendrick Nunn was a freshman, DJ Newbill was a senior, and Kendrick Nunn didn't give a shit. He got right in his face like Kendrick does. And I think Newbill at the time had like a crazy streak of double-digit games and got tossed with 7 points or something. So the streak ended. But that was one for sure. Indiana, we were just almost like two ships passing in the night. I mean, they were, the year that we played them in 15-16, my redshirt year, they won the Big Ten. I mean, we weren't very good that year. So there wasn't really much there. Purdue wasn't Purdue yet at that point. It was
like the AJ Hammonds years, right?
It was AJ Hammonds, Kendall Stevens, like it was Ronnie Johnson.
Who's the kid out of Chicago? Evanston. Who's that? Nigel?
Yeah, Eastern.
Yeah, he was on those.
Yeah,
teams.
he was a little bit after me, but yeah, I mean, those were the main ones. And like I said, the Penn State one felt like it had a little bit of carryover. Michigan a little bit. We had some good battles with them as well. But like it always comes back to Mizzou for me. And I talk about it when we talk about bragging rights every year. But I feel like any good rivalry, yes, there needs to be winning on both sides to even it out, but there also needs to be bad blood isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I loved about the Iowa Michigan stuff. And it does feel like Michigan State has the chance to right now. Like with what happened up there, it feels like that's got a chance to, and it's always better when both teams are good. right? Like because it just
Totally.
means more.
I mean, it reminds me of like, Blake Griffin would always talk about it when the Warriors were coming up. They always had to get past the Clippers, and there was bad blood in those series, and it was really for like a year, maybe 2 years. And then in like 2018, when the Warriors were just rolling over teams, there would be people in the media that were talking about it as a rivalry, and Blake Griffin and some of the people for the Clippers were like, they've kicked our ass for years. This isn't a rivalry anymore. So it's interesting. But I do agree with Chris Collins too, where Northwestern's at a point where Northwestern is respected. And I even watching during that game, they're like, man, it's been 12 years since Northwestern's won in that building. And I'm like, man, that's a long time. I'm like, wait, that was my freshman year. So it's like a crazy realization, because I remember that game. Like I played in the first half, and again, I'm a freshman, whatever, 5'11", 150 pounds. It's like my first real Big Ten action, because it was early in the Big Ten slate. And I get in, I'm pumped, I'm kind of in the rotation, and we would run our offense, our flow game is what we would call it. And once the guy got the pass up top, if you were on the wing and a guy was in the corner, you cut through. And we would always call it a bumper car screen, where if you could cut through and kind of like run into your own man. I checked in. At the time, I was in for 30 seconds, and they passed it to the wing, and they passed it to the top, and I cut through from the wing. And Dave Sobolewski who was their point guard, was guarding me, or I think maybe guarding the corner man. And I tried to run. I'm like, hey, bumper car screen, not understanding that I'm the short freshman guy who's not going to get any benefit of the doubt. And it created this little collision. I was in it for 30 seconds, and it was a moving screen turnover. And I'm like, great, this is awesome. Great. So I think I was maybe in there for a minute and a half longer, and then that was it. But that was I thought about that during the game. I was like, man, like when you start getting older, you're like, 12 years seems like so long ago, and you're like, wait, no, that was me. That was my freshman year. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's been a long time. Dave Sobolewski, Frank Kaminsky, pretty good high school duo, by the way.
Bennett Academy.
Bennett Academy.
Yeah. We used to live in Naperville. There was a chance that if we stayed in Naperville, me and my brother were going to go to Bennett, which would have been
what a powerhouse.
Pretty fun. Because that team would have been a lot of fun to be a part of.
Mike LaTulip, you're the goods, man. We appreciate it. We'll catch up with you next week.
Appreciate you, man.